Well, right now, I am at a place that honestly has become almost my second home. I'm out here so much. I'm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And if you look out in the distance, right about here, well, you can see Barlow's Knoll, where much of the fighting raged on day one of the Battle of Gettysburg. But we're not talking about Barlow's Knoll today. Today, we are right here at the Adams County Historical Society's new Gettysburg Beyond the Battle Museum. And I'm so excited to check this out. I was invited out to see kind of like a museum preview. Saw this, last summer, and it was, still under construction. But anyway, today, there's going to be a lunch. There's going to be all kinds of people here. And the keynote speaker, the guest of honor, is going to be none other than Ken Burns. As I mentioned, we are here at the Adams County Historical Society's Beyond the Battle Museum, which I'm, again, so excited to see. This museum, as the name implies, goes beyond the Battle of Gettysburg and really focuses in on the human interest stories of the people who lived here. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped to take a look at that because it's kind of an overlooked, aspect of the Battle of Gettysburg. Got all kinds of people who we're going to be linking up with today. Andrew Dalton, the director of the museum, Tim Smith, who also works here. You've seen him on some other videos that we've done on the channel, and several others, including Ken Burns, who is really the best of the best, in my opinion, when it comes to documentary filmmaking. So yeah, interested in getting in here and seeing what there is to see. All right, so just got up here to the upper floor, kind of in the meeting area here at the Adams County Historical Society Museum. And as you can hear, there's a lot of people mingling around here, kind of loud. Anyway, we're getting ready to sit down, have lunch, and then yeah, Ken Burns is going to speak. So we just got sat down to eat. They sat me at the smart kids table, so I'm here with I'm here with Chris and Gary, American Battlefield Trust, Wayne Mott's Gettysburg Foundation, Tim Smith, and we're also right back here got Ken Burns. So he should be speaking here in a little bit. All right, so they just brought out my lunch here. A little bit fancier than what I'm used to eating. Trying to figure out if I'm supposed to eat this flour or not.
So I'm very happy to be here. The first time I was ever in Gettysburg. Gettysburg was in my imagination as a little boy. I grew up, I remember very well the centennial, as I'm sure you do, of the Civil War. It was a big deal. I had been given a few years before, my brother and I, a set of Civil War soldiers, blue and gray. I was older, I was always blue. My brother was always gray, because, older brothers have to win,
Never did the first day's battle, always the third days.
Yeah, right. Those are little details, right? And then I did read Jeff's dad's work. David McCullough had asked me, he said, "You read The Killer Angels?" And at that point, I had no idea what he was talking about. And he I don't think he gave it to me as he did many books, but he just said, you should read this. And so I had noticed that all of the subjects of my first films, on the Brooklyn Bridge, on the Shakers, on Huey Long, on the Statue of Liberty, on the Congress and Thomas Hart Benton, all of them had the Civil War as a determining part of the story that we were telling. And so every place I turned, I felt like I was checked by this big, huge, mammoth moment in American history. And then I read the relatively short novel of the Battle of Gettysburg. It actually begins before that and leads up, and the story of principally Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was to me an unknown figure that I couldn't keep which Confederate general and which Union general was this besides Lee and Grant. But it made an impact in my mind, and then I remember I would dream about it, and I would keep my thumb at the various battle situation maps that are throughout the novel. And so I had been here, but I had never been here.
All right, so we just finished listening to Ken Burns speak, and let me explain what's getting ready to happen. They're getting ready to take groups of people through the museum to preview it. So I'm going to try and get what I can where I can. There's a lot of people here, so there might be a little bit of noise. I'm going to try and maybe film stuff in between, groups of people coming through. But I'm going to do my best. But speaking of Ken Burns, Ken Burns has a huge impact on the town of Gettysburg through his Civil War series, and they have a display here that kind of has some artifacts and honors this legendary documentary filmmaker. Now, this is really cool to me. Ken Burns' 1990 Civil War series was the first of his documentaries that I saw for myself. I remember, watching it when I was a kid, and again, you're going to get some personal opinion here as we are looking at some of these newspaper clippings and things from Newsweek and such. Personally, prior to Ken Burns, historic documentaries were kind of dry and difficult to watch. One thing that Ken Burns really mastered was giving life to the dead and bringing emotion into history and really making it real, both with music and with these personal narratives. Now, this is so cool for just a camera geek like me. This is the 16 millimeter motion picture camera that Burns used during the filming of the Civil War. You can see being used right here. And then, of course, this was before the digital age, so this is all analog, how they're filming these photos that would later become known as the Ken Burns effect, taking these still photos and adding some movement and motion to them. But anyway, yeah, regular old redneck filmmakers like me. I don't even know if I'd call myself a filmmaker. I'm just a regular dude with a camera. But it's people like Ken Burns who really laid the groundwork and changed documentary filmmaking.
I'm Andrew Dalton with the Adams County Historical Society. We're here inside Gettysburg's newest museum called Beyond the Battle. I'm standing in front of a rock formation that you may recognize. It's Devil's Den. We built a recreation of Devil's Den. It's about a third the size of the actual rock formation, but that's what you'll see when you first enter the museum, and then you'll begin a journey through time over 300 years of history with an emphasis on what life was like for the people who lived in this community in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, one of the most famous places in the world, and how these people lived through events like the Battle of Gettysburg, but also what happened here before the founding of our town, the founding of Gettysburg, and later years. Of course, Dwight D. Eisenhower was a famous resident of Gettysburg, and there's many, many other stories from both before and beyond the Battle of Gettysburg that we hope you'll come here and see. It's the first time this story's been told. We have all kinds of incredible interactives, media, and photographs and artifacts, over 600 original artifacts, and lots of just really powerful stories. I hope you'll come and see us after we open in April.
So, as Andrew mentioned, the museum here really goes beyond the battle and talks about like some of the prehistoric history and the history after the Battle of Gettysburg. So here they have this display showing like dinosaur footprints, and there's a spot in the park where you can actually go see some of these dinosaur footprints, and oddly enough, I've never been to see it myself. And of course, before there were European settlers here in this area, there were Native Americans. So that is reflected in this gallery. So we have all kinds of axe heads and net sinkers and drills and arrowheads and projectile points. All of these were sourced from the Gettysburg area to reflect the people who were here before the European settlers. Here's something that's kind of neat. This is a replica of something called a crown stone. So this is a stone that showed the division between the Mason-Dixon line, and it carries the Penn and Calvert coat of arms. And then there's this symbolic divide as you're walking across, showing you crossing the Mason-Dixon line. Okay, now as you move out of the prehistoric era and the Native American era, well, they start talking about European settlement in this area. So here, they show some of the early roads that went to Gettysburg or Getty's Tavern, and then they have something kind of neat. They have this reconstructed tavern that you walk into, and you can read about some of the patriots from the American Revolution. And as you're here, it's kind of this immersive thing where you've got music playing and there are people who are talking. But yeah, really cool. And all kinds of things for kids to do on like scavenger hunts here as well. Well, this is pretty interesting. This is something about the founding of Gettysburg. So, Gettysburg was founded by a guy named James Geddes. He was the son of Samuel Geddes. And take a look at this. This is an original lot map of Gettysburg. Okay, so it shows the names of the different families who lived on each lot. And what's really neat is it's written all on animal skin. So the price for each lot was $10, and then there was a yearly fee of $1 that would be paid to Geddes. Yeah, really fascinating. Moving on, we see someone who was a very prominent historic figure that frequented the area of Gettysburg, and that was Thaddeus Stevens, who was an ardent abolitionist. So they tell a little bit of his story here. And then they have all kinds of like really interesting artifacts. Here's like a gavel. Here is an original photo of Thaddeus Stevens that he gifted to a woman named Mary Horner, who lived in Gettysburg. They also have this right here. This is a letter that Thaddeus Stevens wrote to Abraham Lincoln. And then this is Thaddeus Stevens' office chair. So yeah, pretty neat. And then some of his books. And then they also talk about the abolition movement here in the Gettysburg area, which is really fascinating. Now, speaking of fascinating, here's one other thing that is just so interesting. So this is a chair that belonged to a woman named Mag Palm. Now, in Gettysburg, we are just north of the Mason-Dixon line. So Pennsylvania was a free state, but just to the south, Maryland was a slave state. So there was this issue that they were having where I guess you could call them slave catchers were coming up north and abducting black men and women and children and then transporting them south into slavery. One of them that they attempted to abduct was Margaret Palm, who went by the name of Mag Palm. And she was traveling, it says here, she was traveling home on the night of February 2nd, 1858, was attacked by this group of men who attempted to kidnap her and throw her into the back of a wagon to take her to the south. But she resisted and was said to have possessed more than ordinary muscular power. Pretty amazing. Oh, and it says also here there's a quote from an interview that was done with Mag Palm that she says she was fighting them the best she could with her hands tied. She would attempt to strike them and succeeded in one instance in catching an attacker's thumb in her mouth and bit the thumb off. Dadgum. So this woman was not to be trifled with. Here we move to the 1860 election, which is going to be kind of the most divisive moment that is going to result in the country splitting apart. And they have a few things here, like this portrait of Abraham Lincoln. Try and get to where there's not as much of a glare. And then they also have some really neat artifacts, like this campaign ribbon. And also kind of, again, connecting to the local history, a Gettysburg Compiler subscription book. So this was for, a publication that was staunchly anti-Lincoln, is what it says here. Moving now to some artifacts of the Civil War. And a lot of these things are connected with locals. So maybe not necessarily the Battle of Gettysburg, but maybe people from the area or in Adams County who fought in the war. So here is a roster of the men of Company B of the 138th Pennsylvania Infantry. They also have like this battle-scarred canteen. They have revolver and sword. I'm not going into the details of all of these things. You can come and see all of that for yourself. But as we move along, here they have a Medal of Honor that was awarded to a guy by the name of Daniel Regal, who performed an act of bravery at the Battle of Cedar Creek in Virginia. But one other thing that I wanted to show was this. This is so interesting. This is a drum and bucktail from Charles Gilbert. He was a 25-year-old musician with Company K and carried this drum and bucktail decoration. He was a native of Gettysburg and fought here in 1863. So these guys, are fighting, for their homes. They're not just fighting for their country here during the Battle of Gettysburg. And he later became a battlefield guide here. We're now moving into a section of the museum where they look at where the war comes home, where the Confederates launch an invasion into the North and all converge here on Gettysburg. And I'm just going to point out a few of the artifacts here. The one that really stood out to me that I think is quite amazing is this homemade Confederate flag. So this is a flag that was made by Joseph Reed and his family. They lived near Fairfield, and they stitched together this thing to hang outside their home to try and basically keep the rebels from destroying their property, to make it look like they were, sympathizers with the Confederate cause. Here you see, some Confederate currency, and then also this note right here. This is Jubal Early's demands for what he wanted from the town of Gettysburg, which included 60 barrels of flour and 7,000 pounds of bacon, 1,200 pounds of sugar, 600 pounds of coffee, so all kinds of different things that the Confederates were trying to acquire from the locals, basically on this raid. One of the well-known figures of the Battle of Gettysburg is John Burns. He was a 69-year-old citizen of the town and went out to fight alongside these young guys on the first day of the battle, was wounded several times. Well, right here, they have John Burns' flintlock musket. Now, there's some speculation about whether this is the actual musket that he carried into battle, but it is definitely his. And then also they have this decorative cane that was presented to him in 1866. And on top, we'll see how well we can focus this, but on top it has his name inscribed there. And then as we move on, here again are just some relics of things that belong to people in town. Here's a children's anti-slavery book, and then just some pieces of furniture. And they also have some things here about Jenny Wade, who was the only civilian who was killed during the battle. There were people who were killed after the battle with unexploded ordnance, but Jenny Wade is the only one who died during the battle itself. But right here, this might be the showpiece of the museum. This is an exhibit called Caught in the Crossfire, which immerses you in the home of a citizen of Gettysburg during the 1863 battle.
So much has been done from the points of view of the soldiers that came through this town, whether north or south. I thought it was really important. It was a wonderful idea they had at the museum here to tell the story from the civilian point of view. They asked me to write a script for them, and so I sort of took snippets of different personal experiences from several different citizens of Gettysburg who were trapped in their basements and what they went through, what they lived through. The special effects is overwhelming. It's a tremendous exhibit, but what was important to me was to focus on the dialogue, and that's what I wrote, was to focus on what the people, this family, what they're saying to each other. I mean, a mother, father, teenage boy, young girl, and then you've got the grandmother, and these people are terrified. And it's funny because this is a theme that's universal when you're researching all these people, these first-hand accounts in Gettysburg. They start out with the sort of fear of the unknown. I mean, what's going to happen? What are the rebels all about? And then they get the optimism. Our boys are going to shove them back. We'll be okay. And then as the reality begins to set in, and you realize that things are not going so well, and the Union soldiers are falling back through the town, and it's carnage, a different kind of reality sets in, and the fear returns. So telling the people that they have no control, that it's a very different day, that this day is very different now from how it started out.
All right, so we've been making our way through the museum here, and we're in Gettysburg, and you can't talk about Gettysburg without including Gary Edelman from the American Battlefield Trust. You've seen Gary on the channel plenty of times before. Every time Gary shows up on my channel, it gets demonetized or restricted. So we're going to try and get through this one without this episode getting dinged.
And let me say, every time I'm with JD too, we it's the kiss of death. We get half the views we usually get, but we don't think that it should be that way, right?
Exactly. Okay, So I need you to do this without talking about war, violence, or death, so that we don't get hit by YouTube.
All right. So a lot of people, often myself included, you study a place like Gettysburg and you realize that the armies started leaving. Confederates leave on July 4th and 5th, and you have the Union following them, and there's very few soldiers left, and that's sort of where the story for Gettysburg ends for a lot of people. But no, I mean, you have more than 25,000 wounded soldiers left in this town of 2,400 people. You have farms absolutely destroyed and a community forever affected. Forever. It forever changed this place. And I think that a museum like this really focusing upon, what the community was left with. And in a lot of these cases, there was stuff all over the field. I mean, not only were their farm fields destroyed and their wells were poisoned and everything like that, but you've got kids running around picking up artifacts from the battle, sometimes picking up things they shouldn't pick up because there's a lot of dangerous things left over in the wake of an army. And I'm seeing around me at this museum all sorts of incredible stories of perseverance, of tragedy, and everything like that. And one thing I want to talk about, though, is because I'd been through some of this museum before, but I hadn't been through this experience I just had just a couple of minutes ago, and that is this experience beyond the battle where you're in a cellar and hearing the battle going on around you. And I'm already starting to consider whether it's in my top 10 most meaningful Civil War experiences of all time. I have a list. I'll have to consider whether it makes it to that list, but this was incredible. Chills, and honestly, a little bit tear-inducing as well. It's a very effective few minutes to put you into the shoes of a civilian in one Civil War town. There are so many others that had this experience, but one, here at Gettysburg, they do it real well.
At the time of the battle, Charles Philip Croft was one of the professors at the Lutheran Theological Seminary. And on the evening of July 1st, the Southern Army overran Seminary Ridge. Croft and his family fled, and while they were gone, some Southern soldiers stole his tea service. Now, this tea service was very valuable to the family because it was a wedding gift for Charles's wife, Harriet. And she was distraught when she came home and found that the tea service was stolen. But during the retreat of the Confederate Army over the Monterey Pass, Union soldiers recaptured the tea service and they dropped it off in Waynesboro. And the mayor of Waynesboro put an advertisement in the Gettysburg paper announcing that he had found in a bag a tea service, and of course it has the Croft's initials on the spoons and some of the silver. And the tea service was returned to the Croft family. And L.C. Singmaster, actually years later, interviewed members of the family and wrote a nice story about the tea service that we have in our collection.
Okay, now this looted tea set is just interesting as heck to me, or really twice looted. Let me show you a few other artifacts that they have here from after the battle. Okay, so here, I've done a few YouTube shorts showing these things, but it's worth showing again. This is a tailor shop sign that was riddled with bullets. Also, right here, there's an episode that I did in the Gettysburg series where I stayed at a place called the Farnsworth Inn now, but it was originally the Sweeney home, and this is a headboard that was in the Sweeney house. And of course, the side of that building is just torn up with bullet fire, and you can see a bullet hole in that headboard. And then they have a number of artillery shells and different relics that were gathered up from the battlefield. Right here in this bucket, these are all things that were taken from the Sherfy farm. These are artifacts that were collected from dead soldiers on the battlefield. So you have that fife and comb and pocketbook. Here's an ambrotype of Jeremiah Culp. There's a wallet there. Here's a letter. One of the ways that they identified some of these soldiers was by letters that were in their pockets. This right here, this is really interesting. This is a coffin maker's saw. Can't say that I've ever seen one of those. And then also you have this Confederate Surgeon's Kit. I also did another YouTube short on this at one point, but I'll just quickly tell the story again. This is from a guy named Thomas Means, who was a soldier with the 11th Georgia. And you can see the kit there, but you'll notice there's a slash in the case. Well, after performing a lot of surgeries with this kit, he had ran out of bandages and cut the back of the case to pull the cotton out of the liner of the case to use as field dressing. But and there are letters that corroborate this story and give it provenance. Yeah, pretty fascinating.
So Sally Myers is one of the best stories we have. She was 21 years old, a school teacher in Gettysburg. Then after the battle, she became a nurse. Actually, during the battle, she was a nurse and then continued to treat the wounded afterwards. We have some really incredible artifacts from her, including a photograph, an Ambro-type photograph of Sally. We have a hospital pass she used to access Camp Letterman, the general hospital that was established here after the battle. We have her diaries that really tell an incredible story of what life was like for the civilians during the battle. But we also have probably our favorite artifact, is this letter that was written to her from a soldier named Ben Jones, who she got to know during the Battle of Gettysburg. He was in the 149th Pennsylvania, and he was a courier for the Army of the Potomac. After the Battle of Gettysburg, he wrote a letter to her. I guess they had befriended each other during the battle, and you can see the original letter here. He actually attached a flower to it, which you can see the outline of. It's long since wilted away. But because he was a courier for the Army of the Potomac, he, in a way, as a way of impressing her, clipped all the signatures from the generals on these various dispatches that were going back and forth, and then pasted them onto the back of the letter. So we have signatures from General George Meade, General Philip Sheridan, John Sedgwick, David Russell, Horatio Wright, I think Winfield Scott Hancock's down in the bottom right corner. So just an incredible artifact related to the civilian story during the battle, but also with some pretty incredible signatures from Union generals.
Of course, as we've talked about in other videos, after the Battle of Gettysburg, well, Lincoln is going to come here to help dedicate the National Cemetery. And this might be one of the most rare artifacts in the whole museum. This is a program from the Gettysburg Address, and you can see that somebody used it at some point to write some notes and do a little bit of math. But I don't know of many of these that exist, and they have one right here at the museum, and then also have some artifacts that are associated with the Wills family. Okay, so David Wills was very instrumental in putting together all of this stuff. With the cemetery and with the dedication, and here are some artifacts associated with the Wills family. As we transition out of how the Civil War impacted Gettysburg, we move into this room that discusses a little bit of the post-Civil War era, mostly in World War I and World War II. Now, I've heard people say before, what does World War I or World War II have to do with Gettysburg? Well, the answer is a lot. So here you can see you have this doughboy uniform from World War I, and they talk a little bit about the pandemic of 1918. What many people may not realize is that Gettysburg was a tank training ground during World War I. As a matter of fact, they trained right out on the field of Pickett's Charge. This was Camp Colt was the name of it. And then, oh, by the way, I'm going to get gigged if I don't mention this. One of the men who trained here at Camp Colt was none other than Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower. So here he is with pictured with a French Renault. And then when we get to World War II, well, not only do you have soldiers who are from Adams County and from Gettysburg who fight in the war and are buried in the National Cemetery, but Gettysburg also had a POW camp just right outside of town, right there on the battlefield. So there is a history that goes beyond the Civil War. Gettysburg, after the battle, becomes a massive tourist destination, first from families who want to come here and see where their sons or fathers or brothers or uncles fought or died. And then, people continue to come here. This was the largest battle of the Civil War. So this exhibit is talking about tourism at Gettysburg, which I find interesting. So here's a battlefield cane that was carved from a witness tree. And then they also have a few desk sets that were made from mini balls and pieces of wood and pieces of artillery shells. All kinds of different things. I mentioned Eisenhower earlier. Well, Eisenhower is very deeply tied to the history of Gettysburg. He made this his home after he was president. And then you have a number of presidents who visit the battlefield either before, during, or after their presidency. So, of course, we have Abraham Lincoln, Rutherford B. Hayes, Taft, Harding, all the way up to the Bushes and Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So long history tied to the presidents here in Gettysburg as well. And here's we kind of make our way to the end of the museum. They wrap up with Gettysburg in popular culture. So there is Michael Shera, who was the author of The Killer Angels, that the movie Gettysburg, of course, was based from. But take a look at this. They actually have an original manuscript for The Killer Angels. Just absolutely amazing. And then right here is part of the movie script. So all kinds of history here in this town. Both in pop culture and in military history and all kinds of different things. Well, that was pretty dang cool. For anyone who is a history nerd or a history enthusiast, I'm telling you, Gettysburg is like a history mecca. There's so much here to see with the battlefield and the different museums and different things like that. And this museum right here, the Gettysburg Beyond the Battle Museum, is really helping to kind of round out the story of the Battle of Gettysburg and fills a much needed niche. Man, I've got to say, for some dumb monkey with a camera and a YouTube channel, I feel so grateful that I was invited to this museum preview and got to see Ken Burns, who really, as a young guy, was the one who made history cool for me, especially with the Civil War series. I remember watching that with my grandparents. But yeah, pretty amazing day. If you're ever in Gettysburg, you have to visit this place, and also check out the YouTube channel of the Adams County Historical Society. All kinds of great resources on there that you'll learn a lot from.